pardon me. Amateur radio license is also helpful. I have to add, more importantly, that you can receive anything from anywhere transmitted by anybody. The law will prohibit you from disseminating that recording without express permission of all parties involved in the original transmission. If you're going to transmit, you can only transmit in the licensed bands, and interestingly, when you get a mobile phone, by default, you get a license to transmit in the mobile spectrum. However, nowhere else. If you want to become a ham radio operator and do a ham exam, you can use the ham bands. Outside of that, you're not allowed. So as I said, you need that structural redundancy by that white little thin string to keep the things in place. Good to be clean shaven, obviously. Hide radios that the police are likely to use because they don't realise that these radios can also be used by amateur radio people. And then finally, in that scenario, I actually had to have the windows down and the cables going in through the windows, which meant that I couldn't actually open the car door. So if I wanted to get out of the car, I'd have to climb out the window. But if they pull you over, don't desperately try and turn around and unplug things so that you can get out of the car, because they might get pretty suspicious. All right, so this is the kind of more serious stuff. This is security things that you might like to bear in mind next time you say get on a plane. I won't read this out, but I'll leave it up to you to read. So this is, okay, so going back, this is the pager stuff, right? So if you don't like a doctor or a nurse, remember you can transmit stuff. This wasn't only about receiving, you can transmit things into networks. Illegally, of course, so I highly recommend you don't. These things are actually sent out, so you could maybe. So this is the aircraft stuff now. This is the secondary surveillance radar system. A friend of mine actually presented a talk about this at DEF CON recently. The interesting thing is that this system was built with safety in mind and making the sky safer and more efficient. They didn't actually think about security implications of things and leaving things wide open like this. I guess they didn't see this kind of technology coming. So, you know, ASCII art, this is the aircraft version. Alright, so ACARs, remember these were the operational messages sent by the engines and ATC and airline operations. This actually exists. Usually it doesn't come out on paper, it will come up on a display, but this is actually technically part of the standard. And okay, so this is satellite communications, right?
This is it?
So let me just explain this a little bit. To get to the satellite, they need to transmit the signal up there, but it's such a long way away, they need to actually use quite a lot of power to do it. And that changes with the weather. So with cloud cover or with rain, they need to bump up the power dramatically. So if it's a clear sky, they use a very small amount of power. If it's heavy rain, they bump it up. Now the thing is, if it's a clear sky, then one could potentially match this, right? So, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that their signal will reach the satellite if you can do +1 on the power, that is. The other thing is that in the manual that you download for the Optus satellite, or rather the guide, a malfunctioning uplink power control system, which is used to measure the amount by which you need to increase or decrease or transmit power from the ground to actually reach the satellite in the first place, can interfere with other services and even damage a satellite traveling wave tube amplifier. This is the thing that amplifies that tiny little signal that it gets from the Earth and sends it back down to the ground. If your malfunctioning UPC damages the amplifier, it's unlikely they're going to be able to fix it, right? Because it's a little bit far away. So you don't want to do that. Point is, there's lots of cool stuff you can do with this technology, which is much more accessible to the public, and this free open source software. But if you want to transmit, you need a license, and always be safe when you consider what you're transmitting. Thank you very much. And if I can very briefly show you live 3D Airspace in Sydney streaming in right now. Thank you. That's how I spend my hours. All right, here's a Land Chile 800 going up into the air. You'll know what it's like. Up it goes. Yippee. What's also interesting is that this isn't actually a plane. This is a truck, I guess, that is inspecting the perimeter around the runway. They equip them with transponders so they don't have accidents with aircraft, I guess. The speed is actually, I think, twice as much because I had a bug in my code. I was doing a bit shift one extra. But this is my friend and I. This is actually on top of Sydney Park, which overlooks the airport. We would go up from time to time with our gear and set up. We were very happy when we saw that truck there because that was the first time we had seen a non-airborne or something other than an aircraft come up. So it was happy days. You see some interesting things when the Queen was in town. This is actually her plane here, Regal 1, R-E-G-L 1. I'm not sure whether this was necessarily Obama. It was about that time, but I hadn't seen a call sign like that before, Pluto 07. You see things like this, Scott sucks. I actually saw this here last year. These are programmable, so you can set whatever you like. One of my other sort of classic ones that I've noticed is you're supposed to put in the flight number, or you're supposed to put in some sort of description of the aircraft. I've seen one around home, it just says avionics, which is the default setting that the transponder comes with, so I don't know whether they don't even realise they have the technology or what. Before I actually moved here, I had this entire thing set up on the roof of my apartment block without permission from Strata, and that caused a whole hell of pain that I won't tell you about. The point is that it was all happily resolved. I actually had a webcam up there as well, apart from the antennas, facing the airport. And this was cool because I actually could confirm whether the data that I was receiving over the airwaves was in fact actually happening in real life. So there's a plane coming into land, and there it is, just about to cross the runway threshold. This is New York, so there's ADS-B rolled out in America, not nearly as much as Australia, but they're getting there. This is actually some data from last year. And just very quickly then, these messages that pop out, you can see that they leave these little dots behind. This is a different system called ACARS, and it's primarily used to send messages, custom messages, between the cockpit, air traffic control, airline operations, and you can see some really interesting things like the status of the aircraft, how much fuel was used, the takeoff weight. You can also see things like when there's an unruly passenger on board, they call the federal police to escort them off the plane and at the next stop. When the plane lands, it sends back a whole bunch of information, for example, to Rolls-Royce about how the engine was performing during the flight, the vibrations and so on. So here we have another quick video. You can see this plane is taking off. Primarily when they take off and land, that's when they send out a whole bunch of messages. We'll zoom around and you'll see in a moment at the airport itself, there's a United Arab Emirates flight there, and it's about to send off a whole lot of messages. Boom, 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 boom.
What are the protocol lines?
That's a bug in my code, don't worry about that.